Good afternoon, colleagues. It's David Jones from the SHE department. Welcome to our session today. It's the third of a series that we are doing to try and assist labs with regard to COVID-19. The CEO's communicated quite a lot of information already, and I think she's made it clear that top management is fully committed to ensuring that COVID-19 is a priority within the NHLS. HR have communicated around leave and social distancing, and then very recently, and we haven't included it in this presentation, around social distancing with regard to special leave. Just to mention, this presentation is being recorded centrally and it will be available online, but not only the presentation in its videoed form, but also as a PowerPoint that is on the NHLS intranet already. So you're welcome to go on and download it. What you see is what has been loaded this morning. And you can also contact your various SHE sections in the regions, who will be happy to share it with you this afternoon. We will still be sending it out to them. The aim of the presentation, we just want to create an awareness of COVID-19 within the NHLS workplace, with the obvious intent of promoting a common response to dealing with COVID-19. We're going to be tackling it from a safety, health and environment perspective. We will not be touching on HR issues and procurement issues, but we want to address broadly the occupational groups within the NHLS. So what you will find is we'll have a general introduction, then we will go through a few specific groups: cleaners, security, phlebotomy, and office workers, and then we're going to launch into a presentation aimed specifically at our laboratory staff. We're going to be bringing in the various specialists within the SHE department, and the first person who will be sharing with you is Dr. Graham Chin.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, colleagues. And thank you for joining us for the second session. Many people could not make it the first time around. So I ask for those people maybe who are joining again for just a little bit of patience. We're going to run through very similar content just to bring everybody up to speed, as well as a bit of patience and understanding from those people who work with coronavirus, COVID, disease, etc. This might be a little bit basic, but once again, I want to try and bring everybody on board and get everybody up to speed. So just by way of introduction, once again, we, the NHLS, are the largest diagnostic pathology service in South Africa, and we serve more than 80% of the South African population, and South Africa's population, we know, is around 57 million, so that just gives you the extent of how many people we serve and how important our organization is to South Africa. We also supply support to national and provincial health departments. And then if we bring it back closer to home, NHLS, we are an organization of around more than 7,500 employees. And our employees are based right across the country, 350 labs across more than 260 sites in all 9 provinces. And why this is important to just take note of is that we have employees right across the country. And we would like to ensure that health and safety is provided at an equitable level, as standardized as possible, and make sure that every single employee, no matter where you are, is treated the same and offered the same safety measures, etc. Once again, just from an operations perspective, we do diagnostic lab services, we do research, there's teaching and training, and definitely at the moment, outbreak and incident response. And then also we have a section that produces sera for anti-snake venom, and then also our reagents and media. So we're a very large organization, and I think within the context of COVID, it's very easy to forget of ourselves because we are so busy serving South Africa and many around us. Okay, so just let's take us back to COVID-19 and where did this all begin? Well, on the 31st of December 2019, the WHO in China identified a cluster of pneumonia cases. Now, pneumonia is a lower respiratory tract infection, so this is an infection of the chest. And they noticed that a group of people were presenting with this in China, in Wuhan. Subsequent to that, and through many flags and alerts, etc., a virus was finally identified, and the virus is the causative agent then to what was causing these pneumonia or these chest infections. And once again, through a number of research that was taking place, active research at the time, they eventually called this pathogen, this virus causing the disease, SARS-CoV-2. And this SARS-CoV-2 is then the pathogen or the virus that causes COVID-19 disease. And that's what we know today. COVID standing for coronavirus disease, and of course identified in 2019. Initially, the majority of cases were then epidemiologically linked to a seafood, poultry, and live wildlife market, and they thought that the SARS-CoV-2 virus had originated in bats and animals, etc., and it had actually jumped the species gap to infect humans, and that's called a zoonotic disease which essentially is based on animals and somehow works its way into infect people. Okay? The important thing is that as time has gone on, and we are now in March, heading towards the end of March 2020, we have seen that the number of cases increased globally and worldwide. And initially, the cases definitely increased very rapidly, and subsequent to that, there was evidence of person-to-person transmission. And if you look at the bar graph, the blue bar graph represents what's happening in China, and you can see the escalation as it picks up. There's a peak of cases, and then slowly but surely over time, and that was around February, when the cases started to decrease in China, and it was announced sometime last week. There was a day where there was certainly no new cases identified. But interestingly enough, one can see the orange bar graph, which is the global, the worldwide experience, is that over time, there's been numerous increased cases globally. And we in South Africa are part of that. We've seen an increased cases in COVID-19. This is just a map which was taken on the 24th of March 2020 to indicate the countries affected by COVID-19. And you can see globally, the dark blue is all the countries that have reported cases now of COVID-19. And as you can see, there's very few countries now that are essentially spared from COVID-19. Some in Africa really is what is seen. I think I must also emphasize that as we've experienced this outbreak, the statistics are changing daily at such a rapid pace that it's very difficult to include always the updated information. So please, whenever you look at maps, etc., bar graphs, just ensure that you're looking at the right date. Okay, so if we bring it back to home, South African COVID-19 cases on the 5th of March 2020, the South African Minister of Health, Dr. Mkhize, announced the country's first confirmed case of coronavirus or COVID-19 disease. Over time, on the 15th of March, and you can see that that's just 10 days later, the President of South Africa declared a national disaster. That is how quickly the disease and the cases had escalated. Just once again, virtually a week later, there was an announcement of a lockdown in South Africa. And this followed many countries globally which had also effected such changes of locking down their countries. Once again, just to put people in perspective, on the 25th of March, there were 709 cases reported in South Africa. Once again, these statistics change continuously on a day-by-day basis. But the essence is in South Africa, we're seeing mostly Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, and the Western Cape as the provinces most affected and having the highest number of cases identified thus far. I think importantly, initially, those positive cases that came to South Africa sort of on the 5th of March and in the first week were all imported from overseas. So these were travelers that had actually left South Africa and came back to South Africa. And clearly it was Italy that was listed. But then subsequently over time, as we grew closer to the 15th of March, there were local transmission cases identified with positive COVID-19 cases. Okay, so just a little bit of virology, and I'm just going to try and keep this in medicine very basic. Okay, what is coronavirus? So coronavirus, or a family of viruses that are known to cause the common cold, the runny nose, etc., etc. But they've also been linked in historic to more severe outbreaks, such as MERS-CoV, the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, as well as SARS, which is the severe acute respiratory syndrome. And those outbreaks occurred, and these are very much the same viruses. So how does COVID-19 disease then present? Well, we look for a dry cough, which is the commonest symptom. We look for fever, which is defined as more than a temperature of more than 38 degrees centigrade, and general body aches, headache, myalgia, pain in the body. And then as the illness progresses and becomes more symptoms, you can start getting pneumonia, which is once again, like I indicated, a chest infection, a lower respiratory chest infection, and can result in more severe forms of the disease, requiring hospitalization and ultimately death. It's important to note that these symptoms don't have to occur in combination. You can have them singly, they can present in their isolation. And what's also important to note is that most people, according to statistics, is that 80% of people that do get infected with COVID-19 will only suffer the mild form of disease. What we mean by mild is they'll probably, in all likelihood, recover spontaneously with minimal medical intervention. There's about a 15% of people of that group who do become infected that will require a little bit more active medical interventions, hospitalization, a little bit more active medical care, and then a very small group of around 5% that will require more intensified medical care, such as isolation in hospital requiring ICU, etc. And then of that, a very smaller percentage of around 2% that may ultimately die. But I need to emphasize once again that that is the vast minority of people that are going to require such active interventions and ultimately may die of the disease. Okay, so let's look at some characteristics of SARS-CoV-2. How does it behave? And I think this is very important for people to understand this. What is the route of transmission? Because if you understand the route of transmission, one can start to understand why certain control measures have been emphasized and also why the national government has emphasized certain pronouncements. So the main route of transmission of SARS-CoV-2 is through respiratory droplets. Now, respiratory droplets are generated when people cough, when they sneeze, when they speak. So in an infected person with COVID-19 disease, if they start to cough or sneeze, they will generate these droplets, and droplets are fairly large particles, and they will then project these out of the mouth or the nose, and then those droplets will then land on surfaces within a radius of around 2 meters of that person. It is then when somebody comes into contact with those droplets on that surface that they then self-inoculate or touch themselves on their mouth, their eyes, their nose. And it is so how then the infection is introduced, or the organism is introduced to oneself, and infection can occur. The incubation period of SARS-CoV-2 has been cited as between 2 to 14 days, with an average of about 5.2 days. What does this mean? It means that symptoms will appear. If you get infected, symptoms will appear within 14 days. Thereafter, if nothing appears after 14 days, it is unlikely that you are infected with SARS-CoV-2. And this becomes important of why people should be quarantined, and gives the credibility of how a 2-week or 14-day period is advocated for quarantine or isolation. Just interestingly enough, in the early stages of the epidemic, it doubled in size every 7.4 days, and the basic reproductive number, which is the so-called RO number. It's a mathematical term that is used to estimate contagiousness of a disease, was linked to about 2.2. So what that practically means is that every one person who's infected with COVID-19 essentially gives rise to 2 people at minimum being infected. And while this may seem high, it depends where your reference level is. If you look at something like measles, the reproductive number is way higher. It's sitting somewhere around 8 or 9. So one just has to bear that in mind of what the contagious or the reproductive number is and what it represents. Okay, so this slide really is about deciding who should be tested for COVID-19. And this slide has got a lot of information on, and I don't want to confuse many people. But essentially, the guidelines of South Africa show that asymptomatic people should not be tested for COVID-19. Those people who should be tested should fit the criteria for somebody called a person under investigation. And a PUI is then someone who has a symptom, as we discussed before, be that a dry cough, a sore throat, fever, etc. And, importantly, they've either come into contact with a confirmed case of COVID-19, probable case of SARS-CoV-2 infection or COVID-19, or they've had a travel history going to a country where there is definitely reported community transmission of SARS-CoV-2, okay? Or they've worked or attended a healthcare facility where SARS-CoV-2 patients were being treated. The other criterion is really more of clinical significance, is where you don't have a history of anything and someone presents with a severe pneumonia. And a severe pneumonia has a very specific clinical case definition. And that would be really somebody who's sick, shortness of breath, struggling to breathe, often on oxygen, etc. Okay. But essentially, the message that I want to carry with this slide is testing should be reserved for those people who are symptomatic and have a contact with COVID-19 exposure in some form or the other. Once again, just in terms of specimen collection, and this is more of clinical relevance, is that we tend to use a respiratory sample, and that's taken from the nasopharynx, or the nose-throat area, that's the back of the throat, or the oropharynx, which is in the oral cavity at the back of the throat. And that is swabbed and then placed and then sent to the laboratory. In our setting as NHLS, we are more on the receiving side, so we will receive these kind of specimens more than actively involved in taking the specimen. This table is just a detailed indication of more or less, once again, what specimens are to be taken when looking for COVID-19. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, as once again, I think from an NHLS perspective, we will actually be receiving the specimen more than collecting them. What is needed to take a specimen? I think I'll leave this up here for you to read on your own. It's just so that you have an idea from a lab perspective of what goes into taking that specimen and how it possibly could be received in the lab. And then, of course, with the specimen comes the accompanying forms that need to be completed correctly. This is very important for contact tracing and also identifying potential possible exposures. So this really needs to be filled out completely and comprehensively by the clinician or the person taking the specimen. And for more information around specimen collection, etc., please visit the NICD website for further guidance. What I want to now discuss with everybody and us as NHLS employees is how then do we protect ourselves from COVID-19? Now, my colleague Michelle Morgan, who will speak after me, will look a little bit more in detail around specific occupation groups. But this, what I want to outline is generally what everybody can do, irrespective of occupation group. And number one is wash hands. I think this has been really driven home. You see it all over in the media. our presentations have it, posters are available, but please ensure that you wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. And if soap and water is not available, use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. I think one will appreciate if you look at washing hands, and also the next one, avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth with unwashed hands. You will then understand why the transmission is so important and getting a comprehensive understanding of the transmission. Once again, for those people who are sick, try and stay away from people who are sick, coughing, sneezing, because of how it is spread. And if you yourself are sick as well, make sure that you take the necessary hygiene and respiratory precautions and try to avoid contact with people. And this is the focus of what is happening currently in the lockdown, is to socially distance people wherever possible. And social distancing involves keeping away from groups of people, irrespective of whether they're sick or healthy, but really trying to maintain that distance as far as possible. Once again, just try in the NHLS workspaces, in our labs, in our security areas, our office stations, our tea rooms, try and maintain that distance. And the distance that is often quoted is between 1 to 2 meters. So when you are busy in the tea room chatting, when you're having your meetings, when you're interacting with colleagues or at your workstation, try and position things in a way that you maintain a distance. I've touched on this a little bit before, the respiratory hygiene, cover and cough and sneeze in a flexed elbow with a tissue and then throw the tissue away. And the principle was really to try and prevent coughing into your hand, and your hand being contaminated, then touching other surfaces and other people, and so in doing spreading the virus around. Where possible, try and clean and disinfect touch surfaces and objects frequently, door handles, telephones, office desks, and from what I have seen so far, I think people are really making a concerted effort to do this. Secondly, NHLS has recommended that international business travel be prohibited in line with government's pronouncements, as well as all local business travel must be limited. And obviously, if you look at how we are transmitting this training as well, try and use technology as far as possible. I think this has pretty much taken effect if you look at what's happening at all our airports and transporting industry at the moment. Once again, we encourage that all NHLS staff on a medical aid are encouraged to get the flu vaccine, and those employees that are not on a medical aid should also get the flu vaccine. And NHLS is currently making provision through a refund process to effect this. The other important thing that is coming out from the literature of COVID-19 is there are people that are more vulnerable than others, those that are above 60 years old, 65 years old, and those who have comorbid illnesses. So in other words, specifically that if you have uncontrolled diabetes, hypertension, chronic cardiac illnesses that are not controlled, and respiratory illnesses like asthma. So make sure, if you can, that your general health is also of a good standing, and that will help ensure that COVID-19 does not also affect you worse than what it would be. I put this slide in to give you the extent of our organization and just how diverse we are with our occupations in our organization. We have very technical staff, laboratory workers, medical technologists going down through the list, pathologists, laboratory assistants, but we also have many non-laboratory workers as well, drivers, security officials, cleaning staff, gardeners, etc. And all of us need to make a concerted effort. All of us will have different exposure risks to COVID-19, and that is why some groups will require certain preventative measures over others. And Michelle will also delve a little bit more into detail about that. What I wanted to show you with this slide is just how is COVID-19 going to come into the NHLS workplace? Well, how is it going to affect us as a workplace? And there's essentially two ways. It's either going to come through a work-acquired means, and this is most likely the laboratory workers, where you are actually working with a specimen, there's an accident, you happen to become in contact with infected material, perhaps wearing PPE or the appropriate PPE. That's one way how COVID-19 is going to come into NHLS. The other way in a work perspective is if you interact a lot with clients, and those clients might be infected with COVID-19. if you're teaching somebody, or you're coming into close contact with a person, that is another way in which it can be brought into the NHLS workplace. And so, in so doing, spread amongst all of us. The other way is through community acquired, which is where an NHLS worker might go to a shopping centre in personal time and come into contact with somebody who is infected. That person then will become infected, and in so doing, come to work and then infect colleagues and people within the workplace. So this is just to give you an idea of what the potential sources of exposure are in the workplace when it comes to COVID-19. Okay, I hope that just gave you a broad overview. Like I said, thank you for your patience for those who might know this topic very well, but I really just want to reach everybody across the organization. I'm going to hand over now to Michelle, who's going to take us a little bit further through.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you for making the time to join us for this presentation. I'm Michelle Morgan, the Deputy Manager of the SHE Department and also in charge of the safety side of the department. And these are my contact details if you need to contact me. I'd like to begin with risk assessments. NHLS policy and legislation require that a risk assessment be conducted in every workplace. This will assist in establishing what risks and hazards exist and help you to decide what control measures need to be put into place in order to make the workplace safer. And that is the duty of the employer, to make a workplace safe for all its employees. So, NHLS staff are aware that the risk assessments must be conducted and reviewed every 2 years. We have an SOP to this effect, and we have staff in the regions that are constantly assisting with facilitating and evaluating documented risk assessments. The big question remains, at this stage, has your risk assessment been reviewed to include the risks associated with COVID-19? This is a very important aspect that we need to get done as soon as possible. Every NHLS workplace, laboratories, offices, workshops, etc., must ensure that their risk assessment is reviewed to include risk of exposure to COVID-19. It is recommended that a local risk assessment of every laboratory procedure, from sample collection to sample reception, clinical testing, PCR, right up to virus isolation, if relevant in the laboratory, be performed and recorded. Certain lab hazards will then be considered for each process. Example, a leaking sample in receiving, aerosol exposure during sample processing, eye splash during sample processing, or infectious material spillage, etc. In the case of non-laboratory workspaces, example, your offices, your security stations, etc., these are also workplaces, and therefore the risk assessment needs to be updated to include the risk of exposure to COVID-19. For every identified risk, appropriate risk control measures must be selected and implemented in order to mitigate the residual risk to an acceptable level. The approved risk assessment must be recorded and communicated to all staff in the workplace. Staff must read and familiarize themselves with the contents of the risk assessment. As I mentioned, there's an NHLS SOP available on QPulse called GPS 39 that provides step-by-step guidelines on how to conduct a risk assessment. It also provides the tools that you would require for recording and reporting your risk assessment. Risk assessment training is also available on the NHLS intranet, and there is a presentation also included as one module, Module 4 of the Health and Safety Rep training. I'm now going to move on to occupation-specific information regarding COVID-19. I will start with cleaners, go on to security officials, reception, frontline office workers and office staff, phlebotomists, and lastly, laboratory workers. Cleaners. Increased cleaning frequency using appropriate cleaning materials must be put in place. Together with your manager, identify high traffic areas and locations where people frequent in order to plan an appropriate cleaning schedule. Wipe down surfaces and objects that are touched often and by many people, like doors, door handles, desk surfaces, telephones, appliances in kitchens, etc., and toilets. Sorry. Soap and water and common household detergents, such as alcohol or ammonium-based detergents, bleach, etc., are effective disinfectants against COVID-19. Still continuing with cleaners, ensure that hand washing stations are equipped with soap and paper towels. Wear impermeable disposable gloves when cleaning. Wash your hands immediately on removing the gloves with soap and water for at least a minimum period of 20 seconds. Masks and respirators are not indicated for general cleaning. Cleaners should not clean laboratory work surfaces or hazardous spills. This is not allowed as far as NHLS policies and procedures go. Moving on to security officials. Ensure that you keep your environment clean. Where necessary, engage with cleaning staff to assist. Take note of frequently touched surfaces and objects like doors handles, desk surfaces, etc. Be sure that you wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds on a regular basis. If this is not possible, use a hand sanitizer that will be provided to you by your supervisors. Soap and water and common household detergents, such as alcohol or ammonium-based detergents, bleach, etc., are effective disinfectants against COVID-19. Maintain a distance of at least 1 to 2 meters from visitors where possible. Security officials that will be searching visitors' cars or vehicles transporting specimens are not at risk of close contact and therefore do not require PPE. Minimize physical contact with people and visitors where not essential. Moving on to reception, frontline office workers and office staff. Ensure you keep the environment clean, again, where necessary, engage with cleaning staff, again, to assist and to clean frequently touched surfaces and objects. Soap, water, and common household detergents are effective against COVID-19. Reception, front office staff, and office staff should maintain a distance of at least 1 meter from visitors and therefore they do not require PPE. Be sure that you wash your hands with soap and water for at least a minimum period of 20 seconds on a regular basis. If this is not possible, use hand sanitizer that will be provided to you by your supervisors. Moving on to phlebotomists. If you have a resident consulting room or a blood taking station, ensure that you keep your environment clean. Cleaning staff should be made aware to clean frequently touched surfaces and furniture, example, door handles, desk surfaces, chairs, etc. If you have a mobile box with blood drawing supplies, etc., especially if shared between staff, make sure that the handle and compartment lids of these boxes are cleaned regularly. Try and perform procedures in an adequately ventilated room where this is possible. Triage sick patients, that is, deal with those coughing and sneezing first. Make sure you plan the procedure well. Aim to limit the overall time spent with the patient. So what you can do is ensure that you have all your supplies that you need. Example, your Vacutainers, your needles, your alcohol swabs, forms, etc. Obtain patient clinical information prior to patient contact. Try and position the patient when taking blood in such a way that the patient's face is not in your direction. Limit the number of people accompanying or surrounding the patient during blood taking. Example, if the patient has a child, allow only one parent or guardian to be present if necessary. if the patient is a child. Allow only one parent to be present. Apply good clinical practice and standard precautions by washing your hands after doffing PPE, such as gloves, and after finishing with the patient. Precautions and activities for phlebotomists. The PPE that we recommend is required is eye protection. This is your goggles or your visors, surgical masks, because in the case of phlebotomists, they do not generate aerosols in their procedures. Gloves, disposable gloves, and a lab coat and ensure that these are long sleeves and that they are kept buttoned. Specimens once taken must be sealed properly, that is, they must not be left to leak. Ensure that their caps are properly put on and tightened, and they must be packaged correctly to minimize repacking and further exposure down the line. Soap, water, and common household detergents, again, alcohol and ammonium-based detergents, bleach, etc., are effective against COVID-19. Now we're moving on to laboratory workers, which make up a large percentage of our staff. The control, as I mentioned in my previous slide, risk assessment is vitally important and is a vitally important procedure to start off with in a laboratory. It will help you to determine your risks and your hazards and risks and your control measures that need to be put in place. If you look at the hierarchy of controls, we will begin with engineering controls. In terms of laboratory processing of specimens, initial processing of all specimens from patients who are suspected or confirmed to be infected with SARS-CoV-2 should be carried out in a validated biosafety cabinet. Non-propagative diagnostic laboratory work should take place in a BSL-2 laboratory, which is the case of most of our NHLS labs. Propagative work, which involves virus isolation and culture, should take place in a biosafety level 3 laboratory. That is with the NICD labs that are BSL level 3. These are high containment laboratories and have more safer infrastructure to protect against release and contamination with the virus. Appropriate disinfectants with proven activity against envelope viruses must be used to decontaminate work surfaces and clean up spills. These include hypochlorite, which is your bleach and jig, alcohol, 70% is recommended, hydrogen peroxide, quaternary ammonium compounds, and phenolic compounds. Disinfectants must be used for the recommended contact time, at the correct dilution, and within the expiry date of the prepared working solution. This is very important to ensure that the disinfectant acts efficiently. So you need to ensure that when you make up a working solution, make sure that it is labeled with an expiry date at the time that it is prepared. All technical procedures should be performed in such a way that the generation of aerosols and droplets is minimized. Moving on to biological safety cabinets. A biosafety cabinet is an enclosed, ventilated laboratory workspace that uses directional airflow to protect the user from the pathogens being handled. A BSc should be validated by a contracted service provider every 6 months, and a smoke test must be done weekly, depending on whether the BSc is in use or not. It is vitally important for the user to work correctly in such a cabinet and to ensure that he or she is being protected. A biosafety cabinet video is available on the NHLS intranet, and this is available under OSH programs and health and safety. Along with that, there is a smoke test video for biological safety cabinets, also available on the NHLS intranet. Proper BSc setup. Allow the cabinet to run for 15 minutes prior to use. Adjust your sash. Perform a smoke test at least weekly. GPL Pit 138 on QPulse gives you step-by-step instructions on how to correctly perform a smoke test. Read the gauges. In the case of the older cabinets, it would be the magnetic pressure, and the newer cabinets, it would be the air velocity readings. Record the gauge readings and the smoke test results on a log sheet, and we recommend using FML21 on QPulse. Disinfect work surfaces before and after each shift, and this can also be recorded on FML21. Wipe off each item you place into the BSC to minimize potential contamination, and make sure to arrange materials in the BSC in order to segregate contaminated items from your clean items. In the biosafety cabinet video, this is explained quite well and also shown, so it gives you a good idea of what is required. Moving on to the administrative controls. There must be a standard operating procedure for all the tasks and the tests that you perform in the workplace. These can either be, the tasks can be your general tasks, like taking temperatures, decontaminating the biosafety cabinet, etc. With tests, I'm referring to the test assays. And when it comes to the test assays, it's important that you include safety precautions. So safety precautions must be included, and these must be in line with the control measures that are recorded in your risk assessments as well. Make sure that control measures are implemented and adhered to when performing work. Staff must be trained and deemed competent for carrying out their duties. Any testing for the presence of SARS-CoV-2 or testing of clinical specimens from patients meeting suspected case definitions must be performed by properly trained staff. They must be competent in the relevant technical and safety procedures. The handling and processing of specimens from cases with suspected or confirmed COVID-19 infection intended for additional laboratory tests, such as hematology or blood gas analysis, should follow local guidelines for processing potentially infectious materials. A little bit more on administrative controls. The NHLS safety manual, that is POLS 1 to POLS 14, and other relevant safety SOPs must be available, accessible, and read by all staff. Lab managers, who are the 16.2 appointees in the NHLS, have a responsibility to provide information, instructions, and training, and to ensure that laboratory staff are supervised and are wearing the required PPE where necessary. The manager safety video is available on the NHLS intranet under OSH programs, health and safety. This can be used for training purposes, as well as the staff safety video, which is available on the NHLS intranet. Good clinical laboratory practice and universal precautions must always be applied at all times when working in a medical laboratory. Moving on to a personal protective equipment as a control measure, laboratory coats must be used in laboratories to prevent personal clothing from getting splashed on or contaminated by biological agents. Lab coats must be long sleeves, preferably with elasticated or fitted cuffs, and must be worn closed and only in designated areas. Appropriate disposable gloves must be worn for all procedures that may involve contact with blood or body fluids or other potentially infectious materials. Gloves should never be reused and must be visually inspected before use to ensure that they are intact. More on PPE, safety glasses, safety goggles, or face shields or visors must be worn whenever necessary to protect the eyes and face from splashes. Footwear must be worn in a laboratory, and they must be of a design that minimizes slips and trips and can reduce the likelihood of exposure to biological agents. Open-toed shoes and high heels are not permitted in a laboratory. This is included in the NHLS safety manual and it's POLS 3. Respiratory protection is generally not part of the core requirements. However, it is recommended that a local risk assessment be conducted to determine whether the use of respiratory equipment is required, especially when procedures that may create aerosols and droplets are performed outside the BSC or when a BSc is available but has not been safely validated, that is, it has been serviced but has not passed, or the smoke test was done but it didn't pass. So remember to always work in a validated BSc. Moving on to the PPE required for handling a respiratory sample. Remember, this is the minimum PPE required. As I mentioned before, your situation, your laboratory, the infrastructure available, the PPE available, the type of tasks you're doing will all dictate what type of PPE you require. Therefore, the risk assessment is so important and critical. So firstly, you would need, in the case of handling closed specimen tubes, such as transporting or receiving, you require lab coat and gloves. When it comes to open specimen tubes before inactivation or aliquoting, you require, again, gloves and lab coat. And if a BSc is not available, like in the situations that I just mentioned now, or if you're performing a task that needs to be done outside a BSc, you need a lab coat, gloves, N95 mask, and eye protection. Inactivated specimens or extracted nucleic acids, example PCRs, you need a lab coat and gloves. This slide shows you the hand washing technique. You remember that washing of hands, this has been mentioned time and time again, must be done for a minimum of at least 20 seconds with antibacterial soap, which is recommended in labs, and water. The hand washing video is available on the NHLS intranet under HOSH programs, and there is also a poster that has been made available to all NHLS staff and will also be placed on the intranet. This can be used for training and guidance purposes. If you look at the NHLS intranet, you will see that OSH program at the top, and on the left, the last one indicates training for health and safety. If you click on that, you will get all the trainings that are available by the SHE department. The last one shows where safety videos is available. There is also one on COVID-19 training that was not available at the time when the screenshot was done. So NHLS safety videos, that's where you will be able to locate them. This slide shows you all the safety videos that are currently available for laboratory use and training. And if you look at number 5, which is enhanced PPE, kindly note that this is for Ebola purposes specifically. Moving on to packaging and transporting of specimens for coronavirus testing. Send all specimens as a category B substance, because this is what it has been decided, that it is a category B substance. So it's UN 3373 as your other influenza samples. For local and national transport, the specimen is sealed in a leak-proof Ziploc bag. It's placed in a sealed cooler box with cooled ice blocks. It's sent through the normal overnight regional courier service and ensure that the cooler box and ice packs stay at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. Your transport of your samples are sent to the CRDM sample laboratory at NICD, and it must be sent urgently on the same day as collection. You mark it suspected novel coronavirus or COVID-19 to CRDM, and the address is provided on the slide. This information is also available on the NICD website. NHLS laboratories use usual overnight regional courier service and do not delay sending specimens. Moving on to incidents and accidents, make sure that you report all accidents, incidents, and near misses into all houses, and this goes for COVID-19 related incidents as well. Accidents are undesirable harm resulting in injury and indicative of failure in the system. Example, laboratory exposure to a disease that resulted in the person becoming ill or a needle stick injury. An incident is an undesirable event resulting in harm that could have resulted in more serious outcome or injury, example, shelving falling but not injuring anyone, or sample splashing in a BSc. A near miss is a foreseen risk that prevented a serious consequence. Example, a cable that is about to snap or a step about to break. The Tree Department always encourages that near misses must be reported, and this is to prevent incidents from occurring in the future that are likely to occur. Moving on to incidents and accidents, the process is stipulated in POLS 4, and the same process for reporting an injury is available when it comes to SARS-CoV-2. You would refer to POLS 4 and also Form 35 of POLS 9. You can see here Form 35, there is a flow diagram that is made available in the form. We recommend that this form is printed and kept in a prominently displayed in all laboratories so that labs, staff have easy access to them. For OASIS, you would enter OASIS using quick links on the NHLS intranet. And then you would go down to find the OASIS link. If you click on this, you will come to the OASIS homepage, and you have a live application as well as self-report an incident. For people that are current users, they can use this. But if you don't have access, you can use the self-report module. And remember, when you're self-reporting, you are self-reporting the incident for yourself. You cannot self-report for anyone else. Thank you. I hope that you received enough information with regard to COVID-19. And if there are any questions, you can follow up with us later or via email. I would now like to hand you over to the Waste Management Manager, that is Mashele Kolbe. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Good afternoon, colleagues. As Michelle has mentioned, my name is Mashele Kolbe, the Manager of Waste Assurance. Our section is responsible for waste management in the organization. So I'll be talking to you today about how we should manage our waste to ensure that we don't cause any further harm to the environment. We know that in the NHLS, as a healthcare establishment, we generate two main categories of waste, which is general waste, which comprises of packaging material, office paper, flowers, Coke bottles, and so on. And we also generate hazardous waste, which includes our sharps waste, infectious waste, anatomical waste, chemicals, fluorescent light tubes, and so on. So basically we are saying today, or reminding colleagues today, that we need to ensure that in our labs we safely manage and legally manage our waste. And to do that, those who handle their waste need to have appropriate personal protective equipment when handling the waste. And this will be in line with your risk assessment. And to ensure that we safely and legally manage our waste, we are required by law to do at least 5 of the following steps. The first step is to identify and clarify and classify, your waste. By that, what we mean is that you need to establish whether your waste is a general waste or is it hazardous waste. And further to that, if it's hazardous waste, what is it that you need to do with that waste? The sharp waste, infectious waste, anatomical waste, and so on. The second step is to segregate your waste into appropriate containers. We have your red containers, your yellow containers, your green containers, your clear containers that we need to use when we separate our waste. The red container that we use is for anatomical waste. The next one is for infectious waste. This is still red color-coded. The third container that we use is the yellow container for sharps waste. The fourth one is the green container for pharmaceutical waste. And the black or clear container is for general waste. When the waste containers are full, you need to make sure that you close your containers appropriately. And you start by, for instance, in the infectious waste containers and the anatomical waste containers, you find the containers having a liner, a plastic liner. So you firstly need to make sure that plastic liner is sealed with a cable tie, and you close your container, and once you are done, you safely close that container with a biohazard tape. The fourth step is to ensure that we label our waste containers appropriately. We are required to follow the protocols that we have in our labs. You need to make sure that firstly, you write on your container the date you first started using that container. And after closing that container and sealing the container, and making sure before you seal the container that that container is not overfilled. We have guidelines in our Pulse 14 that talks to us relating to how the levels that we need to fill our containers up to. So we need to follow those guidelines. You then need to apply, after closing and sealing your container safely, you then need to use the NHLS sticker that you put on the container, and you complete that sticker. All the necessary fields on that sticker must be completed. And in addition, the Department of Environmental Affairs and the Department of Health, they have given further instructions. They require that all the COVID-19 waste containers must be clearly marked with the words COVID-19. And we have our sticker here that we use in our laboratories. This sticker is one of the stickers that we use in the labs. This is just to show you that where you put your date, where you first open the container, and on the side you would then write COVID-19. And this date that we have here is just to show the date when the container was closed. The fifth step, we are required by the new guidelines that you need to wipe down the sealed container with a 0.5% hypochlorite solution. And the sixth step is to ensure that the temporarily stored waste area is a designated area, and you need to make sure that that waste that you have generated is removed from the lab and it's temporarily stored in that designated area before it is removed by the contractor. And lastly, colleagues, please make sure that you keep all the records of the waste that is being removed from the laboratory and the waste that's been removed by the contractor. Make sure that there is a waste manifest generated before that waste is removed by the contractor. Because we as the organization would also like to know how much waste did we generate in relation to COVID-19. And as I've mentioned that we have Pulse 14, there is more information on how we need to manage our waste in the laboratories. And as I also indicated that we have received special instructions from the Department of Environmental Affairs and also from the Department of Health. And there will be some guidelines that we will be circulating to all the laboratories in relation to the new guidelines. And I have been asked that in the last 3 slides you will see, it's all about how to access updates or any other information related to COVID-19. These are the contact numbers that we have in the country that we are urged to use, and NHL staff members, we are urged to use our internal hotline number. So please let us use that hotline number. And lastly, our contacts as the SHE department are also available on the intranet under the OHS program. Thank you.
Colleagues, it comes to the end of our presentation. I just want to close off with a few words. Before we go to an opportunity where you can ask some questions, but I want to close off first because we're not going to be recording the questions, but we will answer questions for you. And the first thing I want to say is I just want to emphasize what Sheshe has said. The SHE department is not closing down over the next 21 days. We are working, we're going to be available. Please contact us. We'll also be touching base with you. We've put out a poster for hand washing. Today you should be getting a poster as well around hand sanitizing. And as information becomes available, we'll be sharing it with you. The second thing I want to ask is please share. Not everyone is in the fortunate position to have a laptop. Please take lab managers, share with your cleaners, share with people who don't have access to the information. It's really important. And just to mention, the SHE department is going to be implementing an instruction from the CEO. The CEO wants to know from every facility, has training happened with regard to hand washing, and has training happened with regard to COVID-19? So we will be in touch with you. Please, let's take that forward. The other thing I want to just say, we've shared with you as best as we can. What we need to just also say is COVID-19, as Graham has indicated, is very new. It's only really been around for approximately 3 months. Things are changing, things are evolving. What we know today will possibly be different tomorrow. As we become aware of things, we will share, but understand what we've shared today is with the science that we have available today. And in conclusion, let's just remember what our state president said. It's a national disaster. It's going to take all of us playing our part to ensure that we can get on top of COVID-19. To those going into self-isolation, it's your last day at work today, for the next 21 days, please observe the rules. Don't take unnecessary chances. To those of us continuing to work, let's all continue to carry out our duties in a dedicated and in a safe way. Let's care for ourselves, let's care for each other, and let's care for our patients. Thank you.